Hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to this lunchtime learning event. My name is John Sheik. I'm here from UniTasterDays, and I've probably got the easiest job today because I'm going to be just hosting the event. Today, this event is going to look at online university events. We're kind of looking at it from two perspectives. We've got the perspective in terms of Gatsby and how universities can really ensure their events are ticking off as many of the benchmarks as possible, obviously concentrating on benchmark 7. But also looking at the school perspective in terms of online events. And the context to that, and this might make a few people smile that are joining us, is back in April at UniTasterDays, we launched an online events area. We could see that there is naturally going to be loads more online events in the coming weeks and months, and we launched this online events area. So at that point on UniTasterDays, we had 1,400 events. So I just said, let's create an online events hub and let's just filter out all the online events, and therefore we'll have a hub and it will work absolutely seamlessly. In April, there was only 29 online events hosted by universities on UniTasterDays. Now there's been well over 1,000 events added over the last 6 months or so, and it's just brilliant how well the sector have responded in terms of online events provision. And we're still, and fingers crossed this will continue, still #1 on Google for online university events, and therefore seeing loads of users accessing UniTasterDays to find university events, whether that's masterclasses, virtual open days, etc. So please do over once we get into 2021 and as universities and UniConnect networks, you're having more online events, please do list them on UniTasterDays because we are seeing a lot of traffic for online university events. But my job really is to welcome people, introduce our speakers and the event as well, and go through what we're going to do as far as today. The first thing to say, just as far as logistics go, there's a chat that's open. Please feel free to use the chat throughout the event. We record the event as well, so if you wanted to watch back later on and perhaps spend a bit of time looking at the chat as well, that's absolutely fine. So please do use the chat at your leisure. Anything to flag with the chat is of course it goes live so everyone can see it. So keep that in mind, because it is really pleased to say this event has been incredibly popular. So we've got lots of people here. So much so I had to increase the webinar capacity on Zoom, which I've not done since the lockdown. This is the first time since we had to increase it since. So that's brilliant. So use the chat, please. Also, we've got a Q&A platform as well. So if you've got any speakers, any questions for our speakers, which is Marie and Jess, and I'll introduce those in a second, please use the Q&A tab as well. If you can try, and I know it's tricky to compare the two, but if you can try and keep questions for speakers to the Q&A tab, it just means me as the host will make sure I see them. And also, we also run a typed Q&A, so it might be that Marie and Jess during the session actually provide some typed answers for you. Other things to flag just before we start is in terms of structure and your diaries, the event itself is going to be 1 hour in length. So we're going to start in a few minutes with Marie and the event will finish by 1 o'clock. One thing we spotted in terms of our previous event is it was really difficult when the event ended because a lot of people were using the Q&A, a lot of people were using the chat, and it's like, what do we do? Do we continue it now everyone's finished? So what we've done this time to respond to that, which actually I think might be a really nice way to end the event, is Louis is going to join us right at the end. Louis is a first-year student at Birmingham City University studying music, and he's going to play us a few live acoustic Christmas tracks to finish this event. So after the speakers finish, if you wanted to carry on with the chat, if you wanted to use the Q&A, that's really welcome, and there'll be some music if you wanted to do so. So we're not just going to end it really abruptly this time. But you have not tuned in to hear from me, you've tuned in to hear from our fantastic speakers. That's Jess and Marie. Jess is going to be sort of second. Jess is going to look at online university events from a school's perspective. So Jess, just to give you a bit of information about her, she has many hats. She's a consultant for UniTasterDays. She also provides career support to 5 schools in Wiltshire. So she sees firsthand university events all the time, and she's going to do a session looking at online events and go through what, as a school, she thinks schools find most useful. But as well as that, she's also going to talk about, from a university perspective, some tips that you might find handy, given that she works for UniTasterDays as a consultant, but also has the school hat on as well. So, and Jess is actually backed by popular demand because she previously spoke at one of our previous events. And we're also joined by Marie Jobson from the Careers and Enterprise Company. And Marie's going to talk in relation to the Gatsby benchmarks. Now, Marie's a fantastic person to speak about this subject because she's got experience of working from the school side as well. But I won't say too much about that because Marie might cover that in her session. But now that as universities and HE colleges, we're having a lot of online events. What we want to ensure is those events are meaningful and are therefore doing what they can to meet Gatsby Benchmark 7, which a few people might have seen various reports about some schools really struggling and careers hubs struggling with Benchmark 7. So Marie's here to kind of give you some pointers as universities in terms of your events, of how you can support schools with them. Very conscious of these events. You've not tuned in with me, so I'll leave things from there. If I can introduce our first speaker, please. That's Marie Jobson, joining us from the Careers and Enterprise Company. Over to you, Marie.
Great, thank you, John. Like Wendy, I'm beyond excited about the festive finale, but I hope there'll be some good nuggets and something of value in what I'm going to go through today. As John referenced, I have previously been a careers leader in a secondary school, head of sixth form, worked under the auspices of Aim Higher back in the day as well. So really excited to be here today as part of the Careers and Enterprise Company, working within the education team. As an organisation, our remit is to support schools and colleges to meet all of the benchmarks as identified within the career strategy. So today we're going to really focus on benchmark 7. So I'll share my screen and we'll get going. So the aim for my session, if you like, is to really think about best practice in relation to encounters with FE/HE training providers in the current context. Really thinking about planned intent of encounters, meaningful delivery of encounters, and of course, crucially, the impact. So we're going to do this as an overview in general, in terms of what the benchmark means or what kind of good practice looks like. But really what I'm going to try and do is bring it back to our very particular and very challenging current context as well. Benchmarks are my bread and butter. I talk about them, think about them all day, and I love doing that, but it's worth just focusing on what we actually mean by benchmark 7, just in case you're not too familiar with them. So really thinking about what is the benchmark, but crucially for me, how does it fit in with wider careers provision within a school or college? Because the idea of the benchmarks and careers in general is that they're not an abstract concept. They're all kind of intertwined, and they're all very much around that ethos and purpose of schools and colleges. So, but the benchmark specifically for benchmark 7 states that by the age of 16, pupils should have had a meaningful encounter with a full range of learning opportunities. And there's obviously statutory association to that. So that is supported by the Baker Clause to make sure that young people understand all routes. And there's clear links to other benchmarks around that. Other benchmarks talk about labour market information, also deal with how careers can be linked to curriculum learning, employer encounters, and indeed experiences of work. So we've got to work really hard to think about how can the expectations for benchmark 7 flow through the expectations of the other benchmarks, and as I say, about the core purpose of schools and colleges as well. So it does need to be part of a progressive programme so that students can truly know, understand, and be able to do whatever is required to make informed decisions at key transition points. So we'll think about both elements of this today. So by the age of 16, having a meaningful encounter with that full range, including HE, but really crucially by the age of 18, for those who are considering university, that they should have had at least 2 visits by the age of 18, not specifically 16 to 18, but by the age of 18, they should have had visits to universities to meet staff and students. And we'll come back to that in terms of the current context throughout the presentation. So really want to kind of think about meaningful. And we know why quality encounters are important, but I really want to think, because we're all working together to make sure that young people make well-informed decisions and that they can overcome any preconceptions or biases that may prevent them from aiming high. So to do that, young people do need to understand all the options open to them and how they can best prepare for the future demands of the workplace and employment, while also receiving impartial and accurate information. But how do we actually make sure that an encounter is meaningful? And it's not necessarily kind of a rhetorical question, so please do kind of put it in the chat, any ideas that you've got, and we'll kind of unpick some key elements to a meaningful encounter as we go through. But I'm really interested in your thoughts. So what are the key elements to an encounter with FE, HE, or indeed a training provider that would make it meaningful? So at the Careers and Enterprise Company, we have spent time thinking about this. We like activities under benchmark 5 and 6, which are around encounters with employers and experiences of work. We think about that every encounter should have really clear intent, really that the delivery and the impact of activity should sit within a progressive careers programme that supports positive student outcomes. And a recent deep dive, it's yet to be published, but it's coming soon, around benchmark 7 from us. A recent deep dive will highlight that encounters with FE and HE and indeed training providers should be progressive. And it's brilliant to see Kate's comment in the chat, because that's exactly it. This isn't about an ad hoc activity in year 9. Yeah, students understand it, they get it, let's go back to whatever else we were doing. It's about making sure that encounters are progressive. And that links to what we kind of identified in the Can-Do guide that was published in September, where we said learning outcomes need to be defined around kind of the short and long-term intent. So if we're thinking about this kind of idea of planned intent and how it can be progressive, and to Kate's point, how it can kind of be embedded, if you like. So really kind of thinking around learning outcomes that are very specific to a young person, depending on where they are, what's gone before and what's to come. So that's our kind of first point, is around the learning outcomes. The other sub-benchmark for benchmark 7 includes the expectation that by the age of 18, all those who are interested in having a visit to university, interested in university, will have 2 visits. So again, I want to kind of pose that question about how do we make sure that a visit is also meaningful. So this poses a question to yourselves around, as HE providers and to careers leaders, about how do you make sure that the planned intent and outcome of a physical visit are replicated in a virtual sense. So if we're thinking of this as an online event, it almost kind of prompts us to reassess the value and meaning of all encounters, if you like. So it's similar in approach to making an encounter meaningful. What was a planned intent or impact of a physical visit? What are the elements that meant that a visit could be meaningful in a way that would allow a young person to make an informed decision? And then we've got that challenge of how then can we replicate it? Because we can. How can we replicate it to have the same impact as a virtual event? And this is all in the planning and thought behind that planned intent, and the implementation to allow for interaction, active participation of students, whether in person or online, and of course that kind of key element of reflection. So when I'm talking about meaningful encounters, I'm also kind of picking up the benchmark talks about visits as well. Thinking about that planned intent, we don't ask that careers leaders reinvent the wheel on this, and we talk about the CDI framework, and that's a framework for employability in careers, and they identify 17 areas of learning. It's quite a large document, but I've picked out one that's really relevant to us and what we're doing today. So the 14th area of learning in this framework is about identifying choices and opportunities. So for example, if a career leader is really thinking about encounters with FE, encounters with HE, or indeed visits, then these are the learning outcomes that they might associate with planning an encounter or planning a visit. Now, the table across the bottom is actually different key stages. So we've got the 4 columns are key stage 2, key stage 3, key stage 4, and then 16 to 18. So if we look at the learning outcome for key stage 3, so students who are age 12 to 13, we would say that by age 13, young people should know how to identify and systematically explore options open to them. So that starts to give shape and definition to an encounter from yourselves. However, when that young person then reaches year 10 or year 11, you can see it just pushes on a bit. Actually, Encounter then would build on what's gone before. And it's actually a bit more specific, and it's about you being able to research education training and a whole range of options, and then about the best progression pathway to you. So it starts to kind of really shape those events, and how can an event for an 11 or 12-year-old look really different and prepare for a 14, 15-year-old. So in order to be meaningful and to achieve that planned impact, the content and the implementation of events really do have to build on what's gone before, prepare for what's to come within that progressive program, so that things just kind of build towards, because this idea of a young person making an informed or ambitious decision at 16, that doesn't happen by chance. We've got to scaffold it. So if we take this a little bit further, we've got, there are more comprehensive and specific progression frameworks that really start to scaffold. And I think that's a really crucial word around this, around specific learning outcomes. So what I've got here is an example from the Northeast. I think colleagues from the Northeast are on the call today. They mentioned last week they were coming, who've developed this framework. So basically, in this progression framework for outreach work in the Northeast, learning outcomes are set across key stages for learners, but also really excitingly for parents and for teachers, to make sure that CPD messaging and supporting information kind of grows along with that student learning and the student experience and journey. So that kind of wraparound. So if a young person is getting a brilliant experience at school, but they go home and that's contradicted by kind of out-of-date messaging or bias from home, it kind of unpicks everything. So I love that this progression framework has this kind of wraparound idea. So they've Outreach Northeast, who support access to HE opportunities, they also kind of really come back to this idea that a sustained, intensive and progressive programme of interventions will have more impact on raising aspirations and supporting progression to higher education. So this framework leaves absolutely nothing to chance. It's incremental, everything builds on what's gone before, prepares for what's to come. And that's kind of, that means that raising aspirations schools have or colleges have kind of become a really structured, scaffolded journey. And that does require that intentional planning and that progressive structure. So if we kind of think, I've added this just today because this has kind of come in on the December 10th. There's a really interesting, it's quite a weighty document, but it's really well worth getting stuck into. It's called Career Ready, How Schools Can Better Prepare Young People for Working Life in the Era of COVID. And I love this quote. It really kind of gave me that tingle, that light bulb moment, because it's not good enough to simply tell young people about what is out there. You know, this is what you can do at 16. This is what you can do at 18. We do need the deliberately scaffold knowledge, skills, understanding of self, of opportunity, of pathways towards those opportunities, informed choices and positive transitions. I find this quote really, really powerful. And it does, for me, kind of underpins that value of a robust and well-planned progression framework that leaves nothing to chance, particularly for really vulnerable learners. So as providers, as HE and FE providers, you can help schools and colleges to see where your offer, where your outreach, a visit really fits within that kind of journey for that young person. How does it build on what's gone before? How does it prepare them for what's to come? And how does it ultimately help them to make that informed decision? The other elements of the can-do guide that we published in September have two other requirements in addition to that planned intent. We ask that encounters have a two-way interaction with staff and young people, and also that there should be evidence of active student participation as well. So in the can-do guide, we kind of highlight examples, and it would be brilliant in the chat if you could add how you've achieved this. So one of the examples that's referenced in the can-do guide is from Higher Horizons Plus, and we've got in terms of kind of how they made their offer meaningful, if you like. So it was two-way in terms of in University of Kiel, where students were supported by a safeguarded chat, where staff and students could answer questions from young people. So it was a very kind of deliberate, it wasn't just a passive kind of here's who we are, here's what we offer. There was an opportunity for young people to actively take part. The other kind of, I'm just getting my mouse. The other example that I would like to kind of point to is, this is a really good example of across a region where people have worked together, where they've really allowed for interaction and evidence of participation. So the pledge events across Cheshire, Warrington have been incredibly popular with students and families. Look at some of those numbers. Page visits, over 9,500 page visits from parents and from students. So the pledge events were conceived and developed by schools, colleges, employers, and our local enterprise coordinators and the pledge team. So there was already buy-in because people planned it together. And this event kind of nods to another finding that will come out in that deep dive that I referenced, that value in the multi-benchmark delivery. Benchmark 7, in so many ways, is an extension of embedding careers in the curriculum, of employer encounters, experiences of work. Benchmark 7 can be threaded through all of those things. So as a consideration of pathways from subjects within employer encounters or careers fairs, or within experiences of work, really deliberately, maybe unpicking career pathways of colleagues in experiences of work as a specific focus, for example. So it's really kind of, this was an online careers fair where Benchmark 7 was just one of a number of benchmarks. So it had employer encounters, but it was very much Benchmark 7 because the colleges were there, the universities were there talking to young people about what was on offer, etc. So if you kind of already have examples of how you have interaction and active participation, please do pop them in the chat. So that's just kind of a quick summary. I'll move quite quickly because I'm just conscious of time. That's just a recap of where we are before, about kind of good practice around delivering Benchmark 7. Really important to kind of think about that, the impact, if you like. So really thinking about the key questions for a career leader when they think about an offer that you make them. So if you make an offer of a virtual visit, a virtual encounter, a career leader has to overlay that and really think about that other element of Benchmark 7, which is about reflection. How can a student reflect on this? So that's for a career leader to really think about. But for you, you might think about, well, how can I tee that up? How can I support reflection to be part of it? Even if you just nod to it or describe, you know, how reflection might happen. So just be mindful that that's the other element, if you like, of what makes a Benchmark 7 encounter meaningful, is that a student reflects on it. The second question, again, is really for the career leader to think about, what does the data show them in terms of the impact of their programme and the impact of their Benchmark 7 approach? So destination and trend data are over 3 years, what subjects young people are picking at GCSE, where people are going at 16, where people are going at 18, the gender split, the socioeconomic split. Careers leaders really need to interrogate all of that to then be able to come back to you to say, what my data tells me is that we're not, we need to do more about encouraging girls into STEM, for example, or free school meals into HE. But they need to really interrogate that data and be clear with you about what it is. So that's kind of the intent, the implementation, and the impact. Just before questions, I just want to highlight a couple of resources that they are for careers leaders, but please do have a look at our resource directory, particularly, which has just been launched. That has that can-do guide in, so please do have a look at that. But there's lots of information in there for head teachers, careers leaders, etc. And if you're interested, we do put out a careers leader newsletter every half term, and we do have a lot of providers who take note of that, just to see the resources and the themes that we talk to our careers leaders about. That's got a reach of about 8,000 on there. So if you do want to receive that, please do again, have a look at our website and sign up for that.
Thank you very much, Marie. What an excellent presentation. Really, really enjoyed. So topical, Gatsby Benchmark 7, probably prompted by the news story that Careers Hubs were struggling with it, and no doubt schools are as well. So really, really useful session, meaningful impact, etc. I'll now introduce our next speaker. That's Jessica Cook. Jessica, aka the Careers Lady, works across 5 schools to provide career support. She's also a consultant for UniTasterDays. She's a brilliant speaker. She's spoken at our events before and had incredibly good feedback. So, by popular demand, Jess is here again. And Jess is going to talk about online events from a school's perspective. So, what she sees as a really, really good online event, what schools find really useful in terms of online university events, and also with her university hat on in terms of her role with UniTasterDays, what she thinks universities could how universities could perhaps benefit more from online events as well. Jess, over to you.
Okay, so and as John said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I and the schools that I work in have worked to meet Benchmark 7 and really just how virtually that has changed. And then things that you as universities can do to help us in school to be able to meet Benchmark 7 and support our young people, because that is, of course, as well as meeting the benchmarks, what it is all about. So as John mentioned, I've been working to meet Gatsby now since it came into effect nearly 2 years ago. I work with 5 different schools in Wiltshire, and they're all very different schools. So one day I can be meeting with students who are the first in their family to go to university, and the next day I can be working with Oxbridge students and everything in between. So it's really varied in the work that I do, which is great. Before that, I worked in recruitment, so very different sort of line of work, not working with the same age group that I do now. And yeah, everything that I do a lot of guidance, but I also do a lot of implementation of things like university talks and mentoring programs and that sort of thing. So the things that I'm going to cover today are the advantages of online events from a school's perspective. Although COVID has brought a lot of challenges and sort of a lot of struggles, it's also brought a couple of silver linings and a little things that have made our lives actually a little bit easier in school. So I'd like to share those with you. And then just the things that you guys can do as universities to help make our lives even easier when we are trying to meet Benchmark 7 and engaging with higher education establishments. So when I say we, what I'm talking about here is my main school, which is Swindon Academy. And to meet Benchmark 7, these are the things that we did prior to this year. So we take all of our year 10, 11 and 12 on a university visit. And that really is the whole year group. It's not just set 1 or 2 or just those interested in STEM. It is the whole year group that go, whether they're considering university or not, because we just think, how can you consider it if you've never seen it? So we take everybody. We do workshops all the way from year 7 through to year 13. And there has been some sort of feedback from parents that, you know, my little darling has just started year 7. They've barely learned where certain corridors are and you're teaching them about university. And we say, well, yes, we are. The things that we do sort of in that lower key stage 3 is more focused on sort of myth busting and introduction to university. It's nothing too heavy, but we do share it from age 11. We do university mentoring for year 12. So especially for those students that are first in their family to go to university, they are partnered with a student at one of our local universities who mentor them through a program just to basically increase their confidence around university and the thought of that being an option for them. And then we have a weekly newsletter, which basically summarizes all the lovely things that all the universities send me into one place, because trying to share them all individually with students is a huge job. So we just put them all in a newsletter, round it up, and that works well for us. And we also have some of our more local universities come in and talk about their programs. So On Track to Bath, Reading Scholars, those sort of widening participation programs, we have a lot of input for those as well. And here you can see the bits in pink, how that has now changed in this new virtual world that we are all living in. So that first one, university visits, we pushed them back. Firstly, from October, we usually go to January, and I spoke to the unis and it was sort of we have no idea that we'll be able to do anything at all in January. And it's lucky that was the case, because we definitely won't be visiting or taking a whole year group at least to visit a university next term. We've pushed it back to July. Basically, we don't know. We don't know if it's going to be able to happen, but we hope so. We have arranged, as it says below, running in January 2021 is our virtual workshops. And for year 10, 11, 12 and 13, they are virtual university tours. We are really hopeful that we'll be able to visit in person eventually as well, because it is very different seeing it in real life and sort of seeing it on a screen. So we'll see what happens there. We still run university mentoring. We obviously still send out all the information, and we still run those assemblies virtually. So on the whole, other than the visits, everything is still running how we would expect. So that's really good. So this is the part where, and I've mentioned this to some of my sort of professionals and other people working in careers locally to me, and said, oh yeah, I'm doing a talk and I'm talking about the advantages of online events. And they've gone, what? We hate online events, you know, we much prefer them, you know, have a real talker in. But there really are some silver linings and some advantages for schools. And I just wanted to share those because I think it's quite important. And I guess for you guys as universities speaking to schools, to be able to highlight some of these as well, because there are a few things that actually have made our lives a little bit easier. So the first one is that you don't have to book a large hall to accommodate students. Previously, we would have obviously had to book the sports hall or the main hall, something like that, to sit all the students down in for, you know, whatever speaker was coming in from whatever university. Well, because of things like Teams and Zoom now, they can basically just log in from their classrooms. We don't all have to go into one space. They can all stay in their classrooms, which makes it much, much easier in terms of speaking to premises, getting all the chairs and tables put out, etc. So that is one of the advantages that I found. The other thing is, as I said, you don't have to arrange time to take students out of class. So they can all stay in the classrooms that they're in, which one, as I've just said, you don't have to book another room. But secondly, you don't have to say to students, right, you need to come to this place at this time. So it saves a big communication piece. They go to their usual classrooms, the teacher logs into the Zoom or the Teams call, and then the event happens, and there's not really a massive amount of facilitation needed from our part, which is lovely. You don't need individual IT access. I think this, in lockdown 1, when all the schools were closed, it was really difficult for us. One of the schools that I work at is from a low income background within Swindon, so the digital divide was huge. We had so many students that had no Wi-Fi at home, had no laptop at home, they couldn't work, they couldn't access IT, and it was a real challenge to overcome. So this was more of an impact, I guess, then in lockdown 1, but it's still present now that we're back in schools. And that is that they don't need individual IT access. As long as you've got that one whiteboard at the front of the classroom where you can show that input, then that's the IT box ticked. So that makes it quite easy as well. There is no risk of cross-contaminating bubbles. So because all the students remain in their classrooms, you're not having year 8 sat with year 10, or you're not having sort of a big fair where they're walking around and mingling with lots of different people. So it's safe. It means that the health and safety managers in the schools that we work in are happy because we are keeping everyone where they should be and not heightening the risk. And lastly, for people like me who work part-time in all the different schools that I work in, you don't have to be in the building when the input takes place. So we as careers professionals can give the teachers all the information, make sure they're linked up with the university so that if anything goes wrong, they've got a point of contact, and then we can be off, you know, doing other work or wherever we may be. So we don't actually have to be there, stood at the front of the hall, conducting and facilitating the input. So that's quite nice as well. Okay, so the important part for you guys is what universities can do to make online events even easier for professionals working in schools. Similarly to teachers, and all of us really, we like an easy life. We like things to be as easy as possible, as you would imagine. And so the easier your input is to access, the more schools and the more careers professionals will go, oh yeah, we'll book that one, because it's easy. And it's easy to implement, it's easy to run, and it makes our lives just a little bit easier when we've got lots of hats and lots of things going on. So the first one is to select the right online platform. So and the best thing to do here is just to speak to the school and say, what do you already use? It's usually Teams, and in which case, use Teams. There are some schools that won't allow certain platforms. Zoom, personally, I think Zoom is great, but because they had those sort of hacking issues and things like that early on, some schools will say, we're just not touching Zoom. We don't feel it's as safe as Teams, for example. And therefore, if you're running something on that platform, they won't share it with their students, and they've just sort of boycotted it, if you like. So yeah, speak to the school, see what they use. Have a clear agreement about recording the sessions. Just make sure that the school is aware if you're going to record, and likewise, if they're going to record, they should also make you aware. And make sure you always test before the event. There is nothing worse than thinking you're going to be broadcasting to 300 students, and then that doesn't happen. And it's difficult when you're working with adults, but it's even more difficult when you're working with students. If you've got 30 year 7s across 5 classrooms and the teachers can't access, you're going to have some unhappy teachers and some unhappy students. So just make sure you've tested it, make sure everything works. Timings are another important thing, especially if you're pre-recording sessions. If you've only got hour-long sessions, for example, and schools can only facilitate university inputs during their tutor time sessions, which might be only 20 minutes long, your hour sessions aren't going to get watched. There needs to be maybe either one or the other or both, so that students and the people working in the schools can facilitate them in the time that they have available. One of the negatives of COVID has been, you're all more than aware, the amount of learning that our young people have missed. So trying to get them out of an hour lesson now is even harder than it was before. And as career professionals, we are being given tutor times and smaller sessions like that to be able to fit in our equally important inputs. So it's just to make sure that if you are pre-recording sessions, they're going to get watched by the schools because they fit in the time that we've been allowed. And if you are going to run a live session with a school, speak to that school to arrange the best time for them. And all I can suggest here is just being flexible. Every school is different. Some have tutor in the morning, some have it in the afternoon, some have it after lunch. So it's just being able to work around the school that will be really important for them selecting you as their partner university. So just a couple of things to consider when you are putting together those virtual inputs for school to use. So who is the target audience? How long will they stay engaged for? You can probably engage Year 12 for a whole hour. Trying to engage a whole set of Year 7 students for an hour virtually is very difficult. They need something interactive to just keep their minds focused on that one thing. So that's a good thing to consider. And like I just mentioned, point 2 there, can you set an interactive activity as part of the talk? If you can, then that's ideal because it really gets the students involved. And for those that are kinesthetic learners, really allows them to take that information on board. So the advice from our local CEC coordinator is that there needs to be a live element as part of the event for it to meet benchmark 7. So what we've done is that most of our events are live anyway that we have from universities, but if they're not, we just have a 15-minute Q&A either with staff from the university or student ambassadors from the university to take questions. So they might watch the virtual tour on the website and then have a 10-minute session with a couple of students where they can ask any questions that they've got. And whilst we're on that topic of asking questions, one of the important things is to let students ask questions anonymously. And that can be as easy as getting the teacher who's actually physically in that classroom to give out post-it notes. Students write down their questions on those post-it notes as the talk happens. The teacher collects them at the end and then reads them out so that those students don't have to raise their hand and ask that question that they might feel quite embarrassed about or not confident to ask. Given that animosity allows them to be able to ask the questions that they feel confident to. And then lastly, when you're planning all these events and you've got the careers professional at what other school it might be on the phone, do tell them what else you can offer. Whilst you've got our attention, sending emails is great, but we don't always read them all, I'll be honest with you. But whilst you've got us on the phone, tell us about your mentoring programs and your sort of widening participation programs and all those sorts of things. We want to hear about them, we want to promote them. Like with all of us, it's just time. So whilst you've got us, talk to us about it because we do want to know and we do want to share it with our young people.
Please, if you've got any questions, we'll do, I reckon, 10 minutes or so of live questions for Marie and Jess. And if you don't mind putting the questions in the Q&A tab, just so, again, as your dodgy, inexperienced host, I make sure I get them. But Marie, I've got one that probably is a tricky one for you to answer, but there might be a lot of people here thinking this exact question. Is in terms of the benchmarks, and for obvious reasons, they were produced a long time ago, pre-COVID challenges, etc. But there might be a lot of people, I certainly have, that look at them and think they're obviously designed for visits in, so pre-COVID situations. Given that there is so much online now, and as Jess said in her presentation, that schools aren't going to be physically visiting campuses for or in the main probably won't be visiting campuses in the main for a long time. Is there any chance, can you foresee that there might be any amendments to the benchmarks given the increase in online in the future? I'll come to you, Marie.
I expected the question, but in a way, I kind of hope that the presentation that I've just given kind of shows that that's not necessary. So the benchmarks kind of ask for meaningful encounters. And I think what we've proven, particularly looking at some of the content from Jessica's presentation as well, is actually an online encounter can be meaningful. So I don't want to get hooked up. So somebody else asked a question in the chat about parental. Will there be an amendment to the benchmarks? And there won't. They are recognised as world-class standards. They are fit for purpose. And I think it's about, I really welcome this opportunity to really interrogate what is a meaningful encounter, either with an employer, either with FE or HE provider, or indeed an experience of work. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to actually really unpick that word, but think about what the point of it is. So if an online or virtual encounter can help a young person within that scaffolded progressive journey towards making a positive transition or a good outcome, the benchmarks already allow that to count. So no.
Thank you, Marie. Really good, and I love the honesty as well. That's fantastic. Really great way to answer it. Thank you. Didn't sit on the fence there, Marie, at all.
I'm so sorry. I've made an error in the Q&A. So somebody asked a really good question, and I said I would prefer to answer it live by mistake. So I'm going to answer it live because now I can't type it. But it was about whether I think one provider, whether it was better that in a progressive program. But I think as long as the school has a really progressive kind of framework for what they want each kind of cohort, each key stage to cover, I love that idea of that mixed economy. For us in the Northeast, it was really important. We had 5 brilliant kind of local HE institutions, but I was also really keen that our young people heard from and experienced from outside the area, because there was a trend that young people wouldn't leave the Northeast. So for me, that was really important. So I really like that kind of mix. As long as the career leader's got a handle on what is being covered, I think there is value in multiple providers kind of being involved, just to help the young people see that kind of scope and that range that's out there. So thank you for that question.
Right then, so Jess, in your presentation, you mentioned about virtual activities. Interactive activities are fantastic. So where universities are going to give students stuff to do. Have you seen any particularly good examples of interactive activities that have been delivered through a virtual format? Over to you, Jess.
Yeah. So I haven't seen any yet, but I can give you examples of some ones that I would like to happen, if that would be useful. Our virtual talks are actually happening in January, so we've not had them take place yet. But the ones that I think would be really good. Firstly, check if the students have access to a laptop or not. If they do, then they can take part in things like interactive quizzes and things like that. That can also be really useful for the schools as a bit of a data collection, because if you ask on the quiz, how much you know about universities, are you the first in your family to go to university? That's a good data collection, but it's also a good way to see the basis of where the knowledge that student has right now. And presumably some of the questions that are in that quiz will then be answered in the presentation. So that will work quite nicely. If the students taking part only have paper, some activities that you could do, one that I always like is if you give them an outline of a person, this is obviously younger year groups, and say to them, what do you think a university student looks like? And they might, I don't know, make them look like a scientist or a really creative person or whatever that might be. And then actually it's breaking down the barriers of university students can look like any one of those people that you've drawn, because anyone can go to university. I think anything like that where it gives it a clearer message, but it's also linked to an interactive activity, will, one, be more fun for the students, but secondly, make your talk stand out, because you're not just talking at them, you're giving them something more to think about. So yeah, I'll share some more as well, because there's lots of ideas that I always have, and if I work for a university, I'm sure I'd have loads of interactive activities I could run, and I'll put some in the chat so that you guys can see those.
Thank you, Jess. Jess, just to follow up to that, and really quick on Chloe from Portsmouth asked a really good question, and that was about mobile phones. There's a lot of interactive activities that students can use, Kahoot, etc., where students use mobiles. Have you got any feedback? What's the position on? I know you can't speak for all schools, but the schools you work with, is it a yay or an A, do you reckon?
It is a no, unfortunately. I'm not allowed to do anything that promotes them getting their phones out in school. So even like, I can't put QR codes on posters, because then they're getting their phones out in the corridor, and once they're on the phone, they're on Snapchat, and then it just snowballs from there. So we can't do anything that promotes the use of phones. Like John said, that's not the case for all schools, and some will let them get their phones out, but I think more cases than not, they'd prefer that wasn't part of a talk.
Thank you very much, Jess. Right then, one for Marie, if I can, Marie. Yeah, so Marie, to meet Gatsby Benchmark 7, does a real-time question and answer count, or does it need to be, yes, basically, can you have a non-real-time question session, or does it need to be real-time? That's from David.
Yeah, I really welcome the question. Thank you for that, David. I did mean to kind of pick up on it. This has come up in relation to employer encounters as well, where, for example, you know, videos have been sent in by employers, a task set, and then the young people engage with the employer, for example, via email. And I think really it comes down to the career leader deciding, is this meaningful? So we don't kind of specify that the event has to be live or can't be live, can't be kind of static, if you like, but really it's for that career leader to make that informed decision. The benchmarks are a self-assessment tool. Is it meaningful? So was there a clear learning outcome set? Has that learning outcome been met? Was the planned impact met? And, you know, it doesn't necessarily demand that an event is live, as long as the young person is engaging. I think, you know, what really illuminating Jess's presentation is around make it as easy as possible. Where there's that longer term interaction, that becomes a problem for the school to kind of manage, because you're talking about multiple sessions potentially. So it's about what's feasible, what's realistic, and crucially, what comes down to being meaningful, if you like.
Thank you very much, Marie. Again, brilliant answer. Really grateful for that. Jess, if I can come back to you for a question, if possible, please. And it's looking at online events. So now, as we know, universities, you know, I mentioned right at the start, UniTasterDays in April had 29 online events. Now have seen over probably 1,500 online events. They're everywhere. What do you think the future is? So, like, you know, not going down the situation with vaccines and when we can go to schools, etc. again, but when things do return to normal, hopefully sooner rather than later, do you have any vision of how you see online fitting into on campus, and if there's going to be a preference, or any thoughts, Jess, really on it?
Yeah, so I think and hope that it will be a blended and mixed approach, because the thing is that I think we're going to have people self-isolating for a long time, and inputs need to be available for the students that are in school, but also the students, if you've got a high number in a particular year group that are isolating at that time, then it needs to be accessible for them as well. So I'm hoping that it's going to be blended. That being one of the reasons, and also all of the sort of silver linings that I outlined in my presentation do make it so much easier for some career professionals. And I think it's just going to be dependent on the career professional in each school. If they are quite traditional, and if they are probably a teacher that prefer that face-to-face interaction, they'll probably prefer that from their universities too. But if they are more IT and digital based themselves, then they will see the benefits similar to what I've outlined today and will want to continue that. So I think it's a hard one to answer for all schools, but certainly for the schools that I work in, we see virtual inputs continuing for years to come.
Now I'm going to pass things over to Louis. Louis is a first year student, so no doubt Louis has had an interesting year. He's had a first year and also last year in terms of results, etc. But first year student at Birmingham City University, studying music, and he's going to play us out while the Q&A continues and the chat continues with a couple of Christmas chat tracks. Over to you, Louis.
Bro, cheers. Thanks, John. Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day, you gave it away. This year, to save me from tears, I'll give it to someone special. And last Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day, you gave it away. This year, to save me from tears. I'll give it to someone special. Once bitter and twice as shy, I keep my distance, but you still catch my eye. Tell me, baby, do you recognize me? It's been a year, it doesn't surprise me. Merry Christmas. I wrapped it up and sent it with a note saying, I love you, I meant it. Now I know what a fool I've been, but if you kiss me now, I know you'd ask me again. Last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you give it away. This year, to save me from tears, I'll give it to someone special. Crowded room, friends with tired eyes, hiding from you, your soul of ice. My God, I thought you were someone to rely on. Me, I guess I was a shoulder to cry on, a face on a lover with a fire in his heart, a man undercover, but you tore him apart. Ooh, but now I found a real love, you know you fooled me again. And last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it away. This year, to save me from tears, I'll give it to someone special. Thank you. Snow is falling all around me, children playing, having fun. It's the season for love and understanding. Merry Christmas, everyone. Time for parties and celebrations, people dancing all night long. Time for presents and exchanging kisses. Time for singing Christmas songs. We're gonna have a party tonight. I'm gonna find that girl underneath the mistletoe. We'll kiss by candlelight. Room is swaying, records playing, all the old songs we love to hear. And all I wish that every day was Christmas. What a nice way to spend the year. We're gonna have a party tonight. I'm Gonna find that girl underneath the mistletoe. We'll kiss by candlelight. Snow is falling all around me. Children playing, having fun. It's a season for love and understanding. Merry Christmas, everyone. Snow is falling all around me. Children playing, having fun. It's a season for love and understanding. Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you very much.